Regarding Men, Episode 12. Are All Men Rapists?
Well, hello there. We have a discussion today about men's collective responsibility for rape. It's a solemn subject, and I'm here with my fellow rape enablers, Paul Elam and Tom Golden, who have so far failed, I think it's safe to say, to take responsibility for rape. What made us think that we wanted to talk about this subject today? Yes, there's Tom. What a villain. But what made us think this would be worth talking about today was, as some of you may know, a fairly recent, now that we missed our chance to talk about it last week, a fairly recent comment by a woman named Linda Snecker. She is an MP in Sweden for the Swedish Left Party. And she made some waves recently during a parliamentary debate by talking about men's collective responsibility for rape and the fact that all women live in fear of men and can't tell which men are the rapists and which are not. This is what she actually said, at least this is a translation. So here it is. She said that, quote, men's violence against women governs the entire world structure. She added, we women adapt our lives and our behavior to men's potential threats of violence. Because we cannot see whether you are a rapist or not, we assume that all men are rapists. That is the brutal truth. That's how a structural problem looks. That is why men must take their collective responsibility. All men, she said. So we thought we'd begin talking about that. And this, of course, is not a new idea. This is an idea. I think maybe this is the silver bullet of second wave feminism. It goes all the way back to, well, probably even earlier, but certainly as far back as the doyen of the man blamers, Andrea Dworkin, who, and I'm sure many of our listeners have read this piece of hers, but she has a short essay from about 1983 or 1984 called I Want a 24-Hour Truce, during which there is no rape. And that's where she articulated this idea that I think was once a kind of fringe, crazy idea that was taken up by academics and the radical feminists of the 1980s, but has now really been mainstream. And the fact that a Swedish MP can make almost the exact same statement that Andrea Dworkin made all those years ago during a parliamentary debate, and although she did get pushback for it, this is essentially now accepted wisdom of our political elites, at least on the left, that men's violence is a structural issue, that all women live in fear, and that therefore all men are responsible, must take responsibility for it. Dworkin said, and I would encourage everyone to read this, it's a short essay, it's brilliantly written. She was a brilliant writer, even though she was completely deranged. And she talks about how, this is the reality of women's lives, and men need to recognize that that they have the power, and they have not used that power in order to end rape. So she asks them for something that she says is such a small thing. She says, just give us a 24-hour truce in the war against us. She says, even armies have truces. So you men, use your power. All I'm asking for, and it's so little, is this 24-hour truce. So it's a perfect ploy in that she sets men up for what she alleges is a very simple thing, which of course no man can possibly, or no group of men could ever make actually happen. And then she uses the fact that men won't even give women a 24-hour truce as some sort of evidence that all men are complicit in sexual violence against women. And and that crazy idea has been largely mainstreamed now, to the point that just recently someone sent me some pictures from an Ottawa high school. And these are pictures from the Man Up Against Violence campaign, which is a Canada-wide campaign. I think it started in Western Canada. I don't know, do you guys have it in the United States, Man Up Against Violence?
Well, no, not against violence. We have Man Up through all of our advertising, commercial advertising. We sell products in the U.S. based on a command to man up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the implicit command, but do you have a campaign that is actually called that, Man Up Against Violence? That we do now in Canada, and someone sent me posters from a high school in the Ottawa area by this group, and it's a student-led initiative called Man Up Against Violence, and it shows young boys standing in these posters with various slogans about how they need to take responsibility. One of them says, if you stand by, no, now I'm not going to be able to remember the exact wording, but it's something like, if you stand back and watch violence, no, if you stand back and watch evil, you're standing by it. And the clear implication is that the evil is sexual violence against women. And again, it's this idea that all men, even a young man, a high school boy in grade 10, is somehow responsible for the male evil of sexual violence.
And there's also the implication in that young boys go to school and participate in activities, and every day they witness some sort of sexual violence that's going on, and they're standing there and watching it.
Yeah,
it's a concept of original sin.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so it offers men two equally unpalatable choices. Either one, you identify against your own sex as possessing that kind of original sin, and you make your primary allegiance to be with women and against men, including against your own friends, who you're supposed to monitor, and you're supposed to ask them, did you get consent, and all those kinds of things. So you either do that, or you accept that you are an enabler of evil and that you're somebody who stands by and allows it and is complicit in it. I mean, it's, wow, what a trip to lay on a young guy. Yeah, it's amazing.
Pretty slick.
It is. And, one, I want to reiterate again, this is the concept of original sin. But what strikes me as so glaringly crazy about all this is that when you hear feminists talk about toxic masculinity and you accuse them of attacking all men and masculinity itself as being toxic, they say, what are you, crazy? We're not talking about all men. Like, where on earth could you get the idea that feminists are demonizing all men? And stuff like this, just like you said, Janice, has been happening since the 70s. The idea of men being a perpetrator class isn't new by any means. I started hearing back, I'm 62, and I started hearing that in my early teens. This is nothing new. And this is where I think that the only thing that we can do is encourage men to boisterously reject this kind of narrative. Because if you look out across the culture, what do most men do with this? They keep their heads down and their mouths shut.
Right.
And, our politicians are too gutless.
They do the same thing.
Yes, they do.
Same thing. They keep their heads down and their mouths shut, and they just pass the VAWA. They pass this, their rape laws, just on and on and on. They're just pussies,
Yes, they are. And what they need to do is get up and start talking about, oh, you can't tell the difference between a man who's a rapist and not a rapist. Well, fine. I can't tell the difference between a woman who makes false accusations and one who will tell the truth.
Exactly.
They're virtually indistinguishable from each other.
Yes.
So therefore, they have collective guilt. I need to demand an apology from Janice for all the false accusations against men. And she needs to do something about it. And she needs to be able to confront her sisters, other women in this culture, and tell them, don't lie about rape. And while you're at it, tell them, don't throw babies in dumpsters. and don't steal sperm out of a condom and commit paternity fraud, because how do you know the difference? And of course, if any politician talks seriously along those lines, his career would be over.
Yes. Yes.
And for those of you who were thinking I was serious, I'm not. It's crazy to think in terms of whole classes of people. It's a textbook definition of bigotry.
Mm-hmm.
And they commit it like this, and it's out in the open. But once again, men are a target class in true fashion, and it's perfectly acceptable.
And our dilemma has been that we have failed in saying no. We've failed in saying, no, that's bullshit. I'm not going to accept that crap. That's crazy, because it's not all men. It's less than 1% of men, maybe less than 0.5% of men. The same percentage of women who abuse their children. There's a tiny fraction of women who abuse their children. It's greater than the fraction of men who abuse their children, but still there. Now, do we say all women should band together to stop child abuse? No, we don't dream of it.
Or better yet, should we tell courts that you should automatically, since the percentages are slightly higher of women abusing children, we should have a default assumption that fathers get custody.
There you go.
Women, after all, are the child abuser class.
That's it. That's it. Therefore, it must be all women.
It still boggles my mind.
It's crazy
how we can have this mentality about anything. We wouldn't allow it about blacks. We wouldn't allow it about Jews or Hispanics or Asians or gay, straight, maybe straight. But
correct.
You get my point. It's hard. The only class that you can find that it's open season on is pretty much white males.
Yep. And it's open, all right. Christian white males, to be more specific.
Yeah.
You're not really Christians. You're Easter worshippers.
Oh, right. Yes. Thank you, Obama. Yeah.
God, I'm Clinton.
Yeah, I know. It's the illogic of it, and the fact that it has been able to pervade our entire culture, so that now if you go to nearly any website of a women's shelter or an organization, for violence against women, it almost always has some version of that statement that men have to take responsibility for ending violence. It's just amazing, and the things that this woman said, if you applied them, as you guys have just been demonstrating, if you applied them to anything else, if I said, I can't tell when I'm out driving on the road which drivers are drunk or not. I mean, in a way that's true. I can if I watch them long enough, but initially I can't tell just by looking in a car. Yet, therefore, I claim that all drivers are somehow must bear the collective guilt for drunk driving.
Right.
And it's just ludicrous, and yet we have allowed it to take hold to such an extent that there was an article. I want to just find it to make sure I've got all the. Yes, it came out in the New York Times in the fall of 2017, and we all know what was happening in the fall of 2017. It was the beginning of the Harvey Weinstein saga and the Me Too movement, and right on cue, a fairly prolific journalist and English professor named Roxane Gay published an article in the New York Times called "Dear Men, It's You Too," where she actually does come out and say that all men are guilty, that all men. And she has a big long thing. She talks about how women have only just begun to, articulate the burden that they bear, and that, there's so much that has not yet been spoken about because it's just too painful to even begin to unpack, that the horrors that women have faced. And she does say it's all men. All men have done something at some point, and she lists off many of the things are, relatively minor and trivial type things, but supposedly cornering women in office hallways to talk to them, and various other types of sexual harassment. Her demand is that men have to start confessing. And so this goes back to what you were saying, Paul, about the the rhetoric of original male sin. It's all about that. And she uses this kind of language. She talks about testifying. Men have to come forward and testify about how they've done these various things. She talks about how this would be a balm, a BALM, something that would soothe the wound that women have suffered. And what she's engaging in really is a horrific kind of gender slander that has now become perfectly acceptable on the part of feminists. And it's absolutely damaging, it's absolutely inexcusable, and yet it's now widely practiced through this form of collective shaming. And it does function ultimately to say that, I think it's, well, I don't know if it's deliberate, but what it actually means is that there can be no false accusations. That's why feminists don't care about false accusations, because if every man is guilty in some way, then there is no such thing as a false allegation. Because he might not be guilty of that particular thing, but he's guilty of something. Or he at least is a stand-in. Sorry.
I'm reminded of Catherine Cummins and her statement of Vassar, who said that men can benefit from the experience of being falsely accused.
Mm-hmm. Even if I didn't do that thing, I might have done it. She wanted them to reflect on that. Yeah, exactly.
I think it's also important to point out here that what we're seeing with the shaming stuff and blaming all men is basically the rudiments of brainwashing. The first thing, if you look at Lifton's book on brainwashing, which is fascinating, he says the Chinese, what they would do is the first thing they do is attack the identity. And God, have you seen how men's identity has just been attacked repeatedly over and over again? And when they get to a certain point, a boiling point where the identity is soft enough, then they start pushing them to apologize. And the only way they can survive is to apologize over and over again. And the more you do that, the more you lose your own identity. And that's exactly what we see happening with men today. It's crazy. Absolutely insane. And men are being brainwashed,
Some months ago, 6 or 8 months ago, I did the Tom Leykis show. And we started out about, this very topic. And he played a excerpt from Joe Biden speaking to a college group. And it was incredible. I'll try to get that episode for the link below. But he was talking about you men in the I'm talking to all you men in the audience. When you see something, you better say something. You better step in. You better become part of the solution. One, just so you know, when civilians intervene in real crimes, they have a tendency to get killed.
Yeah, no shit.
It happens.
Yeah, really.
And Joe Biden, his big, brave self, up there with Secret Service all around him and armed bodyguards, is telling these college boys that if you see a crime, especially if you see a crime that might be happening to a woman, you better don your suit of armor and jump in there and save her. He's going to get people killed doing that.
Yes.
And this has all the hallmarks of religion. It does. Religion of feminism. Men are evil. It's a classic good and evil struggle. They're on the side of God, or goddess, I should say. Men are Satan. They're the devil. Their only redemption is to bow before the altar of feminism and to repent and to say, I'm guilty. Just like you said with the brainwashing, Tom. Yeah. This is the scariest stuff I can possibly imagine. I remember reading 1984. The first time I read it was about 1984. And I remember thinking, well, there's parts of society that begin to look this way in 84, but the full dystopian picture had not developed.
Correct.
Now, very different. Very, very different. It's scary.
It has developed.
And Of course, we can't even talk about this without talking about the factor of false allegations.
Yes.
Eugene Canaan did a study where he found that was something in the neighborhood of 46%. Now, feminists say it's 2, and that 2% really doesn't matter. like, wait a minute. You guys saying everybody and their sister is getting raped every 5 minutes. 2% of what you think is the rape problem is a whole lot of men in prison that don't belong there. But that aside, Canaan came to the conclusion 46%. And he even fine-tuned, and we had the major reasons that women lie about being raped. Number one is like an alibi. I cheated on my boyfriend. I cheated on my husband. Oh, I was raped. Boom, guy's in jail. That's what happened in Hofstra, by the way. 5 guys arrested and thrown in the clink because she cheated on her boyfriend by having an orgy in the bathroom and didn't want him to know. Another one is to manipulate attention. And what was the third one?
Revenge, I think.
Revenge, yes.
Yes.
Revenge. So getting rejected.
Getting back at him.
By somebody.
I'll show that sucker.
Yes.
And then all you have to do is say, I was raped. And the whole thing plays into the gynocentric mold, of someone with a white knight coming up and taking care of things, and we'll take care of you. And bingo, the poor guy is just screwed.
And, tying into that, you remember a year or two back, the guys in Canada did that "Don't Be That Girl" campaign.
Yeah.
You remember the outrage in the media?
Wow.
People were pissed.
Lost their collective shit over that they played up the "Don't Be That Guy," treating all men as potential rapists, and just reversed the genders. That's all they did. They reversed the genders, and it was, I'd never seen such a meltdown in Canada before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, and what they kept saying, they went right away to rape, that these men are condoning rape. They're blaming the victim. The posters never said that. The posters said there is such a thing as a false allegation. So don't make false allegations. It never said anything about rape. It never encouraged it or claimed it wasn't harmful or anything. So yeah, we're at the point where men are so locked into this position of only having these 2 options. Either accept your guilt and turn against your own sex, or accept that you're a rape apologist. Those are the only 2 options. But even when, I thought that poster campaign was brilliant. It turned everything back on. It showed the blaming logic, the insistence on collective responsibility, and they were beautifully done, and yet nobody could hear it.
Option 3, red pill.
Yeah, that's the thing, and obviously that's it's so difficult though. It is so difficult.
It's
when
hard.
Everybody around you is just going crazy the moment you object to the blame narrative. But that's absolutely what men have to do, and women obviously.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the thing. I mean, in this religion, and it is a religion. In this religion, though, there's no possibility of being absolved of your sins.
I was going to say forgiveness. There's no forgiveness.
There isn't. No. The feminist God, you can repent, but that's all you'll be allowed to do. You might have partial restoration, but you'll have to carry your cross forever.
Yes.
There is one other thing you can do.
What's that, Paul?
You can identify as a woman. Because now even feminists are getting raked over the coals by the trans issue.
Yeah.
Yes.
That poster campaign, I agree, Janice, it was brilliant. And plus, I never laughed so much in my life.
It felt so good.
Calls once a week from somebody in Canadian media wanting to talk to me about that. And I just was able to have a blast with them by turning the questions on. As a matter of fact, several people that I talked to never quoted me because all I did was say, tell me what the problem is.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's not a problem with the original poster campaign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the original poster campaign was so insulting. I mean, it was so demeaning. The pictures that it showed a passed out woman and a guy standing over her reaching to unzip his fly with the words, when she's, it's not sex when she's passed out. I mean, so horrific, hectoring men about consent, and just awful. Yeah.
Lordy mercy.
Crazy.
That's what we're dealing with, though.
It is.
Yeah.
Life in the feminist world, and isn't it a shame?
And
Honestly,
it's
I
pretty-
love red pills, but I think it's an awful shame that we have to suggest more or less checking out of the whole mentality that the society has, because it's not just feminism.
That's right.
Once you go red, as it were, you don't fit in most places. Is one of the things that makes the conferences so magical, is that you get to be around people that are of like mind for a change.
Yes.
Because everybody else in the world, man, just regular people off the street, you show them that poster and they're like, yeah, so.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate.
It's true.
Oh, disappointing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but things are shifting a little bit. There's more red-pilled folks coming out, and we're getting a small voice now. And guys out there, put your voice up, speak it out, say that this is wrong. This crap is crazy. And the more people stand up and do that, the more we can take a chip out of it.
There is a change going on. Janice mentioned the shelters, where if you look at their literature, they all say pretty much the same thing about men, that men need to take accountability and to intervene on each other and do the right thing.
Yeah.
But many shelters have also, and it doesn't mean anything, but they've had to acknowledge that there are male victims. Even the White Ribbon Campaign in Australia had to acknowledge that there were male victims. Now they say, yes, there's male victims and they should be helped, just not by us.
Right, exactly.
But that's a start. That's how things start.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. And if we keep on insisting that collective responsibility, the assigning of collective blame, collective responsibility, that is the root of totalitarianism. That is how people are singled out to be destroyed, to be made into second-class citizens. We've seen it throughout history. I think if we keep on insisting about that, it certainly at least gives people tools to resist.
Absolutely. Read your Solzhenitsyn.
Yeah.
If I could ask you, Janice, because you're around, your job has put you in the vicinity of a lot of young people, millennials and Gen Ys or Gen Zs or whatever they're, I lose track of the generations. But what I know is, like, if you look at voting polls here in the United States and opinion polls, you'll see that, for instance, a majority of young people, millennials and younger, believe that socialism is a better option than capitalism.
Yeah.
And part of that, I think, is education, a problem with education, that they haven't actually learned the truth about world history and about socialism's and communism's record on the planet. And part of it, I think, is just the apathy in parents about watching what schools are doing, which is absolutely incredibly wrong. But, these young people buy this stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to imagine how it keeps happening.
Yeah. No, I know. It's terrifying.
It's the same thing. It's brainwashing.
Do you see that in your students coming out in discussions?
Yeah, I would say generally, yes. The left generally, the radical left, the feminist left, has had a lockdown on public education for the last 25 years, and it is bearing fruit. It's
rotten fruit.
Yeah. Yeah, I just heard there's something on Fox News somebody sent me from very recently, and I'm not going to remember all the details, but it was a young guy who was objecting to the way that Shakespeare was being taught. and it was something to do with gender and whether Shakespeare was pro-transgender. The issue is actually pretty complex because Shakespeare loved cross-dressing in his plays, and he was always playing with gender, male-female roles and that kind of thing. So it is kind of actually Shakespeare, well, there's no one right answer. But anyway, this guy was saying that, it would be impossible for somebody in Shakespeare's day and age to have thought of transgenderism in the way we think of it now, and to have approved that idea that you could be born in the wrong body. And he was, got in huge trouble, and that he recorded the conversation that he had with a male authority figure, a male teacher, presumably telling him that you are not allowed to speak in a way that offends people. And if you do, you have committed harassment. He said to the teacher, I had girls screaming in my face, cursing at me. Wasn't that harassment? No, because he was the one that committed the original offense. He was the one that offended originally, and so he had to take responsibility for that. And so it's that mindset. I mean, it really is totalitarian that teachers are imposing on students. You're not allowed to dissent, and if you do, that counts as, some kind of horrific infraction, especially, of course, if you're a young white man, young white boy. And and that's what I see. Boys have been cowed. They have been told they have to accept their evil, and girls have been told that they're virtuous victims and that they can say anything, and we're all to applaud and give them deference. I don't know. Yeah, eventually.
It's amazing to me how somebody who could study enough to acquire a degree could experience that and not see the egregious double standards being practiced.
No, because we've all accepted that the entire history of the human race up until now has been the history of male privilege, and so males are getting their comeuppance. This is collective revenge, and it's considered to be completely acceptable and righteous.
Yes, I noticed all those male patriarchs enjoying their privilege in Normandy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the Civil War.
Yeah.
Yeah, World War I. Yeah, Vietnam, all my buddies in Vietnam. Jeez. I don't know any girls that died in Vietnam. I know a bunch of guys.
59,000.
Yeah, man.
And what's interesting, interesting is the wrong word, what's tragic, just on this subject, since Vietnam, over 100,000 Vietnam vets have suicided.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nearly twice as many as died in the war have killed themselves from PTSD. And then we have people on the left right now today, it was on the news, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying there's nothing wrong with the VA and it doesn't need to be fixed. It's just fine, which of course really makes me want her in charge of my medical care, right?
Oh, God.
As somebody who gets his medical treatment at the VA, I beg to differ.
Yeah. Oh,
well.
Are we about finished?
I think we are.
Okay, who's the Puda?
We came to another happy ending.
We'll make it happy by doing the Puda.
Okay, let's do the Puda. Janice.
Okay. Our Puda goes to the Swedish left MP. Her name was, I can never remember it, Linda Snecker. And we'll include the link of Linda's speech during parliamentary debate in Sweden. And
Snecker the Puta.
We got it by in no time.
Puta.
Oh, there she goes.
There she goes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Puda.
Who gets the humanitarian award?
Eugene Kanan for having the courage to study false allegations and to report the results honestly in a world that didn't want to hear it. He was persecuted severely for that. He's been, of course,
still is
shunned and still is being treated that way.
Yeah.
But he gave us some insight into the problem of false allegations and why we really should tell men, even though it's not saying that all women will lie about being raped, but men should exercise caution, just like women should exercise caution. when they're out drinking. I mean, nobody's responsible but the rapist when it happens. But we've got to be able to tell women that if you get drunk and get into a car with strangers, you are asking for trouble.
Yes.
And of course, saying that, people say that's rape apology.
Whatever.
Yeah,
Anybody
whatever.
who doesn't believe Canaan, please look at the Innocence Project and see that the vast majority of men who have been relieved from false accusations are there because of rape. That's most of the ones that they let go. It's rape accusations.
Craig
Don't give me this
Silverman.
2% crap.
Craig Silverman is a former prosecutor from Denver, Colorado, and he is quoted as saying that in his working with the Denver brass at the police department, that they assessed that over 50% of the allegations that came in were false.
Yeah.
And not unsubstantiated, false.
Yes.
They were lies.
Yes.
We don't know if that number applies to everywhere. To some places, I mean, there's so much we don't know because we can't get honest research on the subject. But suffice it to say that both sexual assault and false allegation are very real problems and need to be taken seriously.
Yes, indeed. So, we about finished for today?
Yes, Tom.
I think we're about
finished for the day.
I think I'm finished for the day.
You think we're finished for the day?
Oh, God. You all take care. See for the next one regarding men. We'll see. I'll see if I can turn the thing off, Paul.
Don't go.
Oh,
Don't
I
go.
almost did it that time. Oh.